Most women don't realize the storm they awaken in a man simply by returning to their essence, not by being louder, not by becoming more like him, but by becoming less of what the world told her to be, and more of what her soul always was. When a woman remembers her nature, soft but immovable, gentle but untamed, mysterious yet grounded, something ancient stirs in the male psyche. Something buried, repressed, and aching for integration. You see, she doesn't just attract a man, she confronts him, not through aggression, but through embodiment. She doesn't speak his language, she speaks the one he forgot, the one that lived in his dreams before he learned to shut them down. To the uninitiated man, such a woman is both a fantasy and a threat, because she reminds him of something his ego cannot control. She disrupts the hierarchy of logic with the elegance of chaos. Her presence alone pierces the veil between who he is and who he pretends to be. Carl Jung wrote of the Anima, the feminine soul image that resides in every man's unconscious. Most men are strangers to her. They bury her, suppress her, fear her, and then, one day, she walks into the room, not as a ghost of myth, but in the eyes of a woman who has remembered herself. That's when it begins. His rehearsed charm starts to fracture. His certainty wavers. He feels things he can't explain. Restlessness, awe, suspicion, need, not because she's manipulative, not because she's playing a game, but because she isn't. Her authenticity threatens everything he's built upon performance. Her stillness unmasks his anxiety. Her joy exposes his numbness. Her quiet wounds his pride. You must understand, a feminine woman who sees a man, who refuses to idolize him or diminish herself, becomes the mirror he cannot shatter. He may mock her, crave her, test her, but he cannot ignore her, because she makes him feel, and that is the one thing his armor was designed to prevent. And yet, she does not pursue. That is her paradox. Her gaze is full, but it does not chase. Her words are clear, but they do not explain. Her love is deep, but it does not beg, because she has transmuted the hunger for approval into the fullness of presence. She does not seek to conquer a man's mind. She dares to awaken his soul. What pierces him most is not her body, though it moves like poetry. It is her self-possession. She belongs to no one, not because she is closed, but because she is whole. There is a quiet revolt in the way. She walks as if the earth itself follows her rhythm. A man may try to define her. He may reduce her to labels: too much, too distant, too sensitive, too unpredictable. But deep down, he knows the truth. She is the unanswered question he was never brave enough to ask. And here is where it begins to burn. The first feminine habit that pierces the male psyche is emotional sovereignty. When a woman refuses to make a man responsible for her internal state, he is both drawn to her and disarmed by her. He is used to being either the villain or the savior. But she casts him as neither. She doesn't punish him for her shadows, nor does she reward him for crumbs of affection. Her feelings rise and fall like tides, but they belong to her. And that terrifies him, because for the first time, he cannot play God. He cannot fix her. He cannot break her. He cannot define her. And worst of all, he cannot control how she affects him. He begins to see her as a mystery that calls forth his own transformation. Not the kind of mystery that confuses, but the kind that reveals. Every reaction he has to her becomes a doorway to his own unconscious. His mother wounds, his ego projections, his fear of surrender, his hunger for the sacred. And she doesn't soothe that chaos. She holds it. She is not impressed by his status. She is not provoked by his silence. She is not wounded by his distance. Because she is not waiting. She is choosing. And the man who has only known conquest begins to unravel in her presence. Not because she is doing anything to him, but because she has stopped doing everything for him. She is no longer a mirror for his ego. She is now a mirror for his emptiness. That is why the feminine is feared, not because she is weak, but because her truth cannot be domesticated. She does not make demands. She makes reflections. And when a man is confronted with that kind of clarity, he must choose: evolve or escape. She doesn't need to raise her voice to be heard. Her energy speaks before she does. A room shifts when she enters, not because she commands attention, but because she commands herself. That is the second habit that unsettles the male psyche: energetic integrity. She is not leaking, not scattered, not caught in the wind of external validation. She is centered, as if she's connected to something far deeper than approval. He can sense it. Men are not blind to energy, only disoriented by what they cannot name. And when a woman carries herself with sacred intentionality, when she walks like she knows where she's going even when she doesn't, the masculine structure within him falters. Because she represents a force he cannot map, schedule, or predict. She embodies the unknown, and the masculine mind fears the unknown because it cannot dominate it. So what does he do? He provokes, he tests, he minimizes. Not to hurt her, but to prove she isn't real. To prove she's like the others. To reduce her to the level of drama and reaction, because that's the realm he knows. That's where he's safe. But when she doesn't bite, when she lets his projection burn out like a match in the rain, something else happens. He starts to notice the way his own energy spills, how quickly he rises to defend, or compete, or charm. He starts to realize she's not dancing with his ego. She's waiting for his essence. And that's where the true fear begins, because most men don't know who they are without their ego. They were trained to perform, to fix, to impress. They were taught to dominate or withdraw. But this woman doesn't reward performance. She doesn't respond to charm. She doesn't fall for the illusion. She wants something real, and she has the patience and the self-respect to wait for it. She doesn't chase validation because her soul has outgrown the hunger. She's tasted emptiness before and found her own wholeness in it. She's lived the collapse and came back breathing. That's why her stillness is so unnerving. It was forged in fire. The third feminine habit that pierces the male psyche is her capacity for silence. Not the silence of submission, but the silence of knowing. Most women have been taught to fill space with words, with apologies, with explanations. But the woman who has remembered herself knows that silence is a power. It speaks of boundaries without needing to defend them. It invites intimacy without begging for it. It reveals the truth of a moment, not through pressure, but through presence. She doesn't fear the pause, she inhabits it, and that's where a man loses his footing. Because silence in the presence of the feminine evokes something ancestral, something he cannot analyze or predict. It brings him face to face with himself, his discomfort, his projections, his unmet needs. She watches without judgment. She waits without clinging. She speaks without rehearsing. In her presence, he begins to notice how noisy his own mind has become, how rarely he feels peace, how deeply he yearns to be met, not as a provider or protector, but as a being. And she gives him no script. She offers no rescue. She simply waits in truth. That's what breaks him open. Not her anger, not her tears, but her refusal to abandon her center. He begins to realize that love, in her world, is not earned through performance. It is revealed through authenticity. So he has a choice. He can retreat, as many do, calling her too much, too intense, too complicated. Or he can begin the descent into himself. A descent that is not about pleasing her, but about meeting the man within him, the one he buried beneath ambition, the one he forgot in pursuit of applause. Because deep down, every man wants to be seen, not as a persona, but as a soul, and the feminine in her highest expression sees him, not with pity, not with fantasy, but with truth. And nothing is more terrifying or more liberating than to be truly seen by someone who will not rescue your mask. He cannot seduce her consciousness. He can try to impress her with stories, accomplishments, even poetry of pain. But the woman who has transmuted her own suffering into sovereignty sees through every mask as if it were made of glass. That is the fourth habit that pierces the male psyche. Radical discernment. Not suspicion, not cynicism, but the kind of knowing that comes from having been broken open, stitched back together, and made whole by fire. She no longer needs to learn a man's intentions through words. She feels his energy before he speaks. His tone, his eyes, his breath, his unconscious becomes visible to her. Not because she's psychic, but because she's present. Her nervous system is not distracted by the noise of proving her worth, so she hears the tremble in his masculinity even as he smiles. And that's what unnerves him, because for the first time, someone sees him, not just the version of himself he curated to survive. She sees the child hiding behind the armor. She sees the craving beneath the performance. She sees the rage he never voiced, the grief he never processed, the emptiness he spent decades avoiding. And she does not flinch. She doesn't rescue him. She doesn't scold him. She doesn't mother him. She simply refuses to make his pain her prison. This kind of woman lives from the inside out. Her discernment isn't about control. It's about clarity. She is no longer available for men who seek her light just to avoid their own darkness. And so she becomes an initiation. A threshold. Not all men can cross it. Because to be loved by a woman like this, a man must meet himself. He must confront his projections. He must own his patterns. He must become conscious of the ways he avoids depth. And that's no small demand. Not because she imposes it, but because her very presence requires it. The feminine in her power does not chase love, because she embodies it. This is the most devastating truth for the ego to accept. She doesn't need him, not for validation, not for safety, not for identity. She may want him. She may admire his presence, respect his mission, support his evolution, but she is not addicted to the fantasy. She is not bargaining for belonging. She is whole, and her wholeness tastes like rejection to the unhealed masculine. But it's not rejection, it's invitation, an invitation into his own wholeness, his own self-respect, his own emotional sovereignty. She will not lower herself to be understood by someone who refuses to grow, but she will hold the door open for the man willing to rise. That is the paradox of the awakened feminine. She does not compete. She does not convince. She remembers. She remembers who she is, and by remembering, she invites others to do the same. Her power is not in seduction, it's in resonance. She speaks directly to the soul, bypassing the mind, disrupting the script. And that brings us to the final habit, the one that breaks men open in ways no logic can prepare them for: embodied detachment. This woman has loved. She has given too much. She has stayed too long. She has bent herself into shapes that hurt. But now she lives with open hands. She is no longer owned by the outcome. She no longer clings to what isn't choosing her. She is capable of walking away, not out of bitterness, but out of truth. Her heart is not closed, but it is guarded by God. A man may offer her charm, attention, affection, but she does not trade her soul for breadcrumbs. She does not betray her intuition for companionship. She listens deeply. And if something in her says no, she obeys. Not because she's afraid, but because she trusts herself more than she fears being alone. This, above all, destabilizes the psyche of the man who is used to being needed, who is used to women folding under the weight of his inconsistency, who is used to love being a transaction, This woman is not impressed by his presence. She is not afraid of his absence. And so, he must choose, become more than a pattern, or watch her vanish into the myth of the one who got away. She does not haunt him because she withheld love. She haunts him because she never begged for his. And that lingers, because the feminine that pierces the male psyche isn't cruel. She's clear. She is not a storm of chaos. She is the eye within it. She does not punish. She reflects. She does not seduce. She reveals. And when a man finally realizes that her silence was not rejection, but a mirror, it's already too late to wear the mask again. She has no tolerance for half-truths because she has been reborn from the graveyard of false love. This is what most cannot grasp. Her softness is earned. Her grace is a discipline. Her stillness is not a default. It is a choice. Because she's seen what happens when a woman gives from an empty womb, when she sacrifices self on the altar of male potential, when she bleeds for someone who never asked where the wound came from. She's not angry anymore. She's awake. And in that awakening, she has become not just a woman, but an archetype, a force, the Anima incarnate, not just in myth, not just in a man's dreams, but in the flesh. And for the man who meets her with courage, she is the portal to his own evolution. But let's not romanticize this awakening, because it's not wrapped in flowers and songbirds. It comes through loss, through the shattering of illusions, through sitting alone in the darkness of unmet longing, through remembering your own name after years of answering to everyone else's. She had to forget who she was told to be, just to remember who she already was. And now, she is immune to the praise of the world because she knows its applause is fickle. She no longer dances for crumbs. She waits for truth. She no longer decorates her cage. She walks free. So when a man meets her, he may feel desire, obsession, even rage, not because she's doing anything to him, but because his ego is dying in her presence. The version of himself that was built to conquer will collapse in front of a woman who cannot be owned. But here's the miracle. When he lets it collapse, something deeper is born. Not dominance, not control, but devotion. Not devotion to her, devotion to truth. Because the feminine that pierces the male psyche doesn't want worship. She wants presence. She wants the kind of man who can sit with his own discomfort without blaming her for it, who can honor her fire without trying to contain it, who can meet her chaos without turning away, who sees her not as a puzzle to solve, but as a universe to behold. And that kind of man is rare, but not extinct, because just as she is returning to herself, so are they. The men who want to feel again, the men who want more than performance, the men who have suffered in silence, who were told to be hard when all they needed was to feel safe enough to be soft. Those men feel her, not just her body, but her essence. They're not afraid of her emotions because they've met their own. They don't flinch when she's angry. They listen. They don't shame her vulnerability. They cherish it. They don't try to fix her. They witness her. And to them, she is not a challenge. She is a gift. Not because she makes them feel powerful, but because she reminds them of their humanity. Because for the first time in their lives, they are not seducing a woman. They are meeting the feminine, the eternal, the untamed, the wise. And that meeting changes everything. It rewires what love means. It destroys the old myths of control. It reveals that intimacy is not built on comfort, but on truth. And for those brave enough to stay in that fire, there is a rebirth, not just of the relationship, but of the self, of the man who once feared his own reflection, of the woman who once shrank to be loved, both now standing tall, unmasked, undefended, and awake. Two souls, no roles, just truth. ChatGPT Diho. And now, something sacred unfolds. Not loudly, not in grand gestures, but in the quiet revolution of a woman who no longer performs and a man who no longer pretends. Because when the feminine stops asking for permission to exist, and the masculine stops fearing the depth he carries, something ancient begins to heal, between them and within them. The modern world has no roadmap for this. It profits from confusion. It sells identity in fragments. It exalts the chase, the power games, the illusion of control. But this woman, this archetype in flesh, refuses to play. She has exited the theater, mid-scene, barefoot and glowing, with no interest in the script. She doesn't punish the masculine, she invites it. She invites the sacred masculine to return, not the tyrant, not the savior, not the ghost of patriarchs past, but the one who is conscious, embodied, grounded in purpose, open in heart. The one who no longer sees her emotions as weakness. The one who no longer views her independence as threat. The one who meets her soul without flinching. And she meets him without shrinking. This is the restoration of polarity, not through dominance and submission, but through integration. Through two beings who have faced their own shadows, owned their projections, and chosen wholeness over attachment, passion over performance, soul over ego. In her presence, the masculine is no longer confused by her depth. He's moved by it, inspired, awakened. He no longer tries to own her. He honors the fact that she cannot be owned. He sees that her freedom is not a threat to love, it's the proof of it. She is not the reward for his effort. She is the reflection of his capacity. And when she chooses him, truly, deeply, it is not from emptiness, but from fullness. Not because she needs someone to complete her, but because she desires someone who can meet her, not at her surface, but at her core. And what does that kind of woman feel like to a man? Like coming home. After years of war with the world, he meets her, and the noise inside him goes still. Not because she fixed him, not because she soothed every wound, but because she saw through him and did not turn away. That is the final transformation. Not love as transaction, but love as recognition. Two people who've walked through fire and still choose to touch each other with open hands, open hearts, open eyes. No masks, no roles, no control, just presence. And so she no longer lives to be chosen. She lives to choose. She no longer fears being left. She fears leaving herself. She no longer waits to be seen. She sees herself, fully, clearly, tenderly. And the men who once couldn't handle her fire, who once felt pierced by her habits, now understand. She wasn't too much. She was just ahead, because she wasn't trying to break them. She was trying to wake them. And the ones who woke, they rose. Not for her, for themselves. And that is how she changes everything. Not by force, not by seduction, not by sacrifice, but by remembering who she is. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.